Maya stood by the kitchen window, staring blankly at the rain tracing lazy lines down the glass. The kettle clicked off behind her, but she didn't move. Her coffee had gone cold, untouched, much like everything else in her life these days. Mark had left again that morning, suitcase in hand, eyes on his phone, lips brushing her cheek in a gesture so rehearsed it barely registered. Another business trip. Another week of silence broken only by half-hearted texts and obligatory calls that arrived just before bed. She had stopped asking where he was going. The details no longer mattered. She poured the coffee anyway, watching the steam rise and dissipate into the air like her patience. At 36, Maya still carried the kind of beauty that turned heads: high cheekbones, smooth olive skin, dark hair always pulled into something effortlessly elegant. But inside, something had shifted. Years of emotional neglect had carved hollows in her once vibrant self. She felt more like a placeholder in her own life than a participant. The sound of footsteps on the stairs broke her reverie. Jason appeared in the hallway, hair tousled from sleep, a hoodie hanging loose over his lean frame. "Morning, Aunt Maya," he said, his voice lower than she remembered. "Good morning," she replied, offering a faint smile. "Did you sleep okay?" He nodded, grabbing a glass of orange juice.
"Yeah."
"Your guest room's nicer than my dorm." Maya laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar in her own ears. "Glad to hear it. You'll have a quiet place to study, unless I bore you to death first." Jason smiled, shy but genuine. "Doubt it." He was 19 now, visiting for a short break before finals. She hadn't seen him in nearly a year. The last time he was still awkward, a little lanky, barely taller than her. Now he carried himself differently, more aware of his presence, more self-assured. She noticed the subtle change in his voice, the broadness of his shoulders. She quickly chastised herself for noticing. Over the next few days, they settled into an easy rhythm. Jason spent his afternoons reading in the sunroom or helping with errands. He was considerate, always offering to help, always asking how her day had been. It was a stark contrast to the indifferent silence she'd grown used to. One evening, after dinner, Maya opened a bottle of red wine. The house was quiet, cloaked in the soft hum of the dishwasher and the gentle patter of rain outside. Jason had gone upstairs, headphones on, probably buried in some game or study notes. She lingered on the couch, swirling the wine in her glass, her legs curled beneath her. The dim lamp beside her cast a warm, amber glow across the room, softening the edges of everything. She closed her eyes. Loneliness was no longer sharp. It had become a dull, constant presence, something she carried with her, like an old coat she couldn't bring herself to shed. Her body ached not just for touch, but for recognition. To feel wanted. To feel alive. She poured another glass, slower this time, and allowed herself to think of things she shouldn't. The thought came unbidden. Jason's voice when he laughed, the way his eyes lingered just a little too long when she spoke. Had she imagined it? The guilt was immediate, but it didn't chase the thought away. Later that night, she slipped into a silk robe, her bare skin cool beneath the fabric. She moved quietly, locking the door to her bedroom before lowering the lights. The wine buzzed gently through her veins, loosening restraint. She lay back on the bed, her fingers tracing the curve of her thigh. Her eyes fluttered shut as her breath grew shallow. In the silence, her own soft sounds seemed louder, more daring. She pictured someone watching. Not Mark. Someone who saw her. The floor creaked outside. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat, heart pounding in her chest. Had she imagined it? A full minute passed. Silence. She exhaled, slowly, trying to calm her nerves. Her body was still humming, caught in the pull of pleasure and panic. She slid under the sheets, pulling them tight around her. The house seemed still again, but the air had changed. In that moment, a new kind of tension entered the space, quiet, invisible, but unmistakable. Something had shifted, and she wasn't sure she wanted to shift it back. Jason couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped hours ago, but a heaviness lingered in the air, thick, still, expectant. He tossed the blanket off his legs and sat up, rubbing the back of his neck. The guest room felt unfamiliar, too quiet. His phone battery had died, and without the usual noise of campus life humming in the background, his mind refused to settle. He stood, padded softly into the hallway, intending only to grab a glass of water. No lights were on, but a faint, rhythmic sound drifted from down the hall. At first, he paused, assuming the television had been left on low. But the longer he listened, the more he realized these weren't electronic sounds. They were human, intimate. He moved without thinking, quiet as a breath, drawn by something he didn't fully understand, or didn't want to admit. The sound was clearer now. A soft gasp, a whisper of skin shifting against silk, a low moan, half caught in someone's throat. Maya's bedroom door was closed, but not tightly. Through the narrow slit, moonlight touched the edge of her bed. Jason's heart pounded. He knew he should turn around, flee back to the safety of his room, pretend he'd heard nothing. But he didn't. His breath slowed, matching hers. Maya lay on her back, sheets pooled around her waist, robe parted. One hand cupped her breast, the other moved slowly, purposefully between her thighs. Her face was turned slightly away, but there was no mistaking the pleasure etched into every line of her body. She wasn't whispering names. She wasn't thinking of Mark. She was alone in her world, and Jason had stepped into it. He didn't mean to stare. He only meant to understand what he was seeing. His aunt, this elegant, composed woman, unraveling in a moment so private, so raw, it left him paralyzed. Then his foot brushed against the baseboard heater with a sharp metallic clink. Maya jolted upright, her eyes flying to the door. Her hand yanked the sheet up to her chest, breath ragged. "Who's there?" Jason stepped back too late. The door creaked open under its own weight. Their eyes met. Time fractured. "Maya, I wasn't," he stammered, voice caught between apology and panic. She stared at him, face flushed crimson, lips parted. "Jason," she breathed, her voice fragile with shock. He turned away immediately, stumbling backward down the hall, heat flooding his skin. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean," his words tangled into silence. Maya sat frozen, heartbeat thundering. Shame flared hot in her chest, warring with something darker, something unspoken. She couldn't hide what he'd seen. The robe, the sheets, her skin, everything was exposed. But it wasn't just the physical that left her raw. It was the fact that she'd wanted to be seen. Maybe not by him. Maybe not by anyone in particular. But still, she waited for the shame to chase away the memory. It didn't. In her bathroom, she splashed water on her face, staring at herself in the mirror. Her eyes looked different, wide, alert. Her body still tingled, the pleasure unfinished, suspended. She wrapped herself in a towel and leaned against the sink, trembling. Across the hall, Jason sat on the edge of his bed, hands buried in his hair. His skin burned with embarrassment, confusion, and something else. The image of her lingered, impossible to erase. Not just her body, but the vulnerability in her expression, the hunger in her touch. He felt wrong, but not repulsed. That scared him most. The night dragged on in silence. Neither slept. Maya lay staring at the ceiling, the fan casting slow-moving shadows across the walls. Her heart had settled, but her mind wouldn't. She had crossed no physical boundary, and yet something between them had shifted in those few seconds, altered, perhaps irrevocably. Morning would come and they would pretend. But this moment wouldn't disappear. It had already been burned into them both, quiet, undeniable, and deeply human. And for reasons she couldn't name, Maya wasn't sure she regretted it. The morning light crept in through the sheer curtains, diffusing the room in pale gold. Maya stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal she wasn't hungry for. Her robe was tied tighter than usual, as if it could hold in what had already slipped loose. Jason entered the kitchen without a word. He moved quietly, deliberately, eyes fixed on the floor. His hoodie from the night before hung off one shoulder. His hair was damp from a shower, but his posture was tight, almost defensive. Good morning, Maya said, her voice steadier than she expected. Jason hesitated before responding. Morning. He opened the fridge, pulled out milk, and poured himself a glass with mechanical precision. Maya watched the way he avoided looking at her. His silence wasn't casual, it was constructed. She set the bowls on the table. Eat, she said gently, gesturing to the food. He nodded, sat across from her, and spooned at the oatmeal without interest. The silence was suffocating. Maya's fingers tightened around her spoon. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to erase what had happened. But nothing she said could undo what he'd seen, or how it had made her feel. I didn't know anyone was awake, she said finally, eyes fixed on her bowl. Jason didn't respond right away. Then, with a quiet voice, he said, I wasn't trying to watch. I just heard something. She looked up at him. His face was red, but his eyes, when they finally met hers, were steady. Embarrassed, yes, but not accusing. I know, she replied. I believe you. A beat passed. I should have locked the door. Jason gave a tight nod. Yeah, maybe. A strange calm settled over them. There was nothing else to say. And yet everything had changed. Later, while folding laundry in the living room, Maya found herself stealing glances at Jason as he sat on the patio with a book. He wasn't reading. He was watching the clouds. His leg bounced restlessly. She wondered what he saw now when he looked at her. Was it disgust? Curiosity? Something worse? Mark called in the afternoon, his voice crackling with bad reception and better excuses. Sorry, babe. Meeting ran late. I'll call you tomorrow, all right? Maya nodded at the silence between sentences. Sure. No problem. When she hung up, she didn't feel disappointment. Just distance. Familiar and dull. Jason helped with dinner, without being asked. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers who had forgotten the steps. At one point, their fingers brushed while reaching for the same bowl. They both froze. I'm sorry, Maya whispered again. Jason looked at her, not away. You don't have to be. The words sat between them, fragile and heavy. Not forgiveness. Not invitation. Just truth. After they ate, Jason offered to do the dishes. Maya let him. She stood in the doorway, watching as he worked with silent focus, sleeves pushed up, water steaming around his hands. You're kind, she said suddenly. You didn't have to be. But you are. He paused, then turned off the tap. So are you. She didn't know what to do with that. Gratitude felt too small. Regret too complicated. That night, she passed his door on her way to bed. It was closed, a line of light glowing beneath it. She lingered, tempted to knock. But she didn't. She lay awake again, the silence louder now. Not painful, but charged. Her body ached, not from desire, but from restraint. A boundary had been exposed, not crossed, but laid bare. She couldn't unknow what had happened. She couldn't forget how it had felt to be seen, not just physically, but entirely. Not as a wife, not as a caretaker or an adult fulfilling a role, but as a woman. Vulnerable. Alive. Jason would leave in the morning. He would carry the memory with him, whether he wanted to or not. So would she. But they would never speak of it. That was the unspoken pact. At sunrise, she watched him from the doorway as he packed his bag. He zipped it closed, paused, then looked at her. For a second, neither moved. Thanks for letting me stay, he said. Anytime, she replied, managing a smile. You're always welcome here. Jason opened his mouth, as if to say something more, then thought better of it. He walked past her, brushing her shoulder lightly with his as he went. It wasn't a touch of affection. It was acknowledgement. She closed the door behind him and leaned against it, the silence returning, familiar now in a new way. Not empty, just waiting.